Looks like a frying pan and some eggs to me.
What's happening, my fellow ghouls and ghoulettes? Welcome to a brand new episode of Cosplay Chris. And to see out the spooky season, I'm going to be giving you guys my own personal rankings of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Obviously, we have the main timeline. We've got Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Freddy vs. Jason, and of course the 2010 remake. Now, I cannot stress this enough. This video and my list is so subjective. There is one particular ranking of one of these films that's quite high on my list. It's gonna leave you guys probably scratching your heads, but hear me out when I get to it. Now, with that being said, at the end of this video, I would love to hear your guys' rankings in the comment section down below. I really love comparing the pair and seeing what's your favorite, what's your least favorite. So grab yourself a snack, something to drink, tip your fedoras, because we're gonna be ranking the Nightmare on Elm Street films, starting with number 9. Number 9 is the 2010 remake by Platinum Dunes. I totally get what they were going for with this remake. They wanted something a lot more darker and a lot more edgy, but to me, it didn't stick the landing. I love Jackie Earle Haley as an actor. Given when he took the role as Freddy Krueger, he did his damn best with what he was given. It doesn't exactly have the best writing, and it's not exactly original because it is trying to go off the original 1984 film. You've got the glove coming out of the bathtub. You've also got Freddy coming out of the wall, which looks so bad with the CGI as opposed to the practical effects where they actually used spandex for Freddy to come through the wall. And that was back in 1984. It's 2010, man. Times have changed. And I do not like the fact that they made Freddy a child. In the original film, he was a child killer, and he always has been a child killer, even though Wes Craven did intend for Freddy to be a bit more evil when it came to the kids, but they sort of sidestepped that. But they really emphasized that topic in this film, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. I actually remember seeing this film when I took myself to LA in 2010 to Weekend of Horrors to meet Robert Englund for the first time. I went to the Grauman's Chinese Theater, saw the movie, and the cinema was absolutely empty. I was the only one there. It was kind of freaky, but kind of cool. I've never had a cinema to myself. I remember watching it, I'm like, it was good, but it was just, didn't stick the landing. Rooney Mara, who plays Nancy, just does not give a shit in this film. Like, comparing her to Heather Langenkamp, it's chalk and cheese. And that's why the 2010 is my number 9. Coming in at number 8 is Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. Like when I did the rankings of Freddy's makeup, there is nothing really memorable about this film, let alone Freddy's makeup. This was a very quick turnaround after the success of Part 4, The Dream Master, and New Line really wanted to keep that momentum going. We have Freddy infiltrating Alice's baby, which was an original idea that was going to be used for Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. They got that writer who originally pitched that script from Part 2, Leslie Bowen, back on board for Part 5. And it's just a very goofy movie. It's all over the place. It has no idea what it wants. Stephen Hopkins, the director, tried his absolute best, and that guy apparently was spread so thin, it got to the point where he told his actors, you're probably going to have to direct yourself today because I'm going to be here, there, everywhere, all over different sound stages. And he even said the logistics that went into making that, you couldn't do it these days. Like, the turnaround was just so quick and batshit crazy. OH&S would probably had a field day on that film, let alone the other films with how quick the turnarounds are to make these and pump them out. It more than borders on cringe. The nightmares are quite creative. So I remember when I was a kid, before I watched any of the Freddy films, one of my friends had seen Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, and he was describing to me Greta's death. Now, we all know Greta is essentially, you are what you eat, with that kill where Freddy feeds herself to her. And the way my friend described it was Freddy holds her down, he's like feeding her guts, and in my childhood mind, that is the worst thing ever. Like, I'm just thinking the most horrible thing. And then when I eventually see The Dream Child, I'm thinking, that was cool, but wasn't what I expected. Again, like, the more these movies went on, the goofier the deaths got, and the less brutal and the less psychologically damaging. Much like Robert's makeup in this film, it's a very forgetful one. Coming in at number 7 is Freddy vs. Jason. Now, you guys are already gonna know which Elm Street film is going to be high on my list, and getting your keyboards ready, your phones ready, that's totally fine. Again, like I said, hear me out. But Freddy vs. Jason was in development hell for so long. The original concept apparently came about in 1985, where a fan came up to Robert Englund after the success of the first one and said, how would you go up against Jason? And then after that, all these drafts were written that just got really cooked. beyond cooked in terms of storyline, characters, stuff like that. And when the film came out in 2003, it was at a time where internet viral campaigns were gearing up. You know, we're a few years away from The Dark Knight and that viral campaign. And the marketing behind this was quite good. I still remember the original website, freddyvsjason.com, and the background music and the animation on that website. And I've tried to backtrack on the reverse time machine, I think it's called, to try and find that website. Haven't had any luck, because I remember just looking at that website over and over and over before the film came out. And don't get me wrong, the film is a riot. I think it's very self-aware that it's going to be this silly spectacle of these two titans of horror literally just handing their nutsacks to each other in the bloodiest way possible. Director Ronnie Yu had the success of Bride of Chucky, and he wanted to bring that feel and tone over to Freddy vs. Jason. Granted, apparently he wasn't a massive fan of Freddy or Jason or their mythologies, but the writers really wanted to keep those mythologies there. They didn't want to change the history or the backgrounds of these characters. It looks like it would have been a laugh riot filming this movie. Like the actors give it their all with what they're given. The props and special effects are brilliant. Some of the kills are amazing. Granted, there is a bit of cheesy CGI in this film, that early 2000s feel to it. Now, I actually didn't see this at the cinemas. I wasn't allowed to. When it finally came out on DVD, Mum and Dad bought it for me and I watched it, and I thought it was really fun. Again, no real massive gripes with this film. Like, it's self-aware with how silly and bombastic it is. And I remember when I got the special edition DVD of this film, it had some of the best special features out there. We get bugger all special features on Blu-ray, 4K movies these days. It's absolutely ridiculous, but they got so in depth with makeup, stunts, just the making of, the development hell stage of it. I love all that type of stuff. So the bonus materials with this film were brilliant. Again, no real massive gripes with this film. It's self-aware, it's silly, bombastic. Moving on to number 6. Oh, everyone's gearing up for it. At number 6, we've got A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. So from like this point on, and even with Freddy vs. Jason, I have no real gripes with these films. Like, I do have my nitpicks here and there, but nothing majorly that stands out for me. It's hard to try and pick all these films, and granted, I am getting a bit sentimental the higher I get on this list, but Dream Master is fine. It tries different things in terms of the direction, the cinematography, the storytelling, and at this point we'd reached the peak of Freddy popularity, in my opinion. You know, with Dream Warriors, it had that very MTV feel to it. But then Dream Master came along, and new director Rennie Harlan really wanted to put Freddy out there as if he was as cool as James Bond or Tom Cruise. I mean, he's sporting sunglasses in the film, for fuck's sake. It's very different when you start at this and go to this. I think Dream Master has quite some interesting kills in it. The laziest one would have to be Rick's death, and apparently that's because they ran out of money. They didn't have any grand way to kill Rick off, so they just dressed up a set like a dojo with cheap sheets and then had the glove fly into his gut, and that was it. But apparently it got to the point where the script wasn't even finished and they were just making shit up on the day of filming, especially the nightmares. Rennie Harlan would jot down his nightmares and then they incorporate them into the kills and the nightmares and also the end sequence of the film. It tries to be very symbolic. Sometimes it hits, but also it's a big miss in some parts of the film. And let's get one thing straight. None of this would be possible without Robert Englund's performance. No one is Freddy but Robert Englund. Granted, Jackie Earle Haley did his own thing with it. He tried his best, but no one can play Freddy like Robert Englund. And he looks like he's having a hoot as Freddy in part 4. He's getting more confident with the character. He's learning new things about the character. Granted, he is very different from that dark iteration we saw in the original 1984 Elm Street, but still it is quite memorable, and it is a product of its time, late 80s MTV generation. I'm trying to make him cool, like I said, like Tom Cruise or James Bond. Coming in at number 5 is Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the precursor to Scream and that meta, self-aware theme that we see so much of in films today. So this is Wes Craven returning to the Elm Street franchise after 10 years since the original 1984 film. And I think this film is so underrated and so smart with its execution. It's based around the actual actors of the original Elm Street film. They are being haunted by an entity of Freddy Krueger. It's not exactly Freddy that we remember, but an entity, a demonic creature that is trying to invade the real world and the dreams of the cast and crew of the original Elm Street film. So Wes Craven looked at all the Elm Street films after his original one to get inspiration for Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and he couldn't make sense of it. So he was going to make a sequel after Freddys Dead and kind of answer his critics, and he thought, this timeline is just a shit show. So what I'm going to do, make this meta and try something different and have Freddy in the real world with Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund, John Saxon, Robert Shea, and Wes Craven playing themselves. Genius. I love this film. I love how self-aware it is. I love that there are Easter eggs and throwbacks and so much fan service in this film. It says a lot about Hollywood, being an actor in Hollywood, being a director or a producer in Hollywood. I really do dig Freddy's overhaul in this film. The look is, like I've said in my makeup video, very sleek, very German-esque, as quoted by Heather Langenkamp. Mind you, I'd dirty him up a little bit more. He's a little bit too clean for my liking, but I love the makeup with the split skin and the muscle showing underneath and that beautiful organic looking bone claw. We also have the mechanical claw at the beginning of the film. Very self-aware. The writing is pretty well on point, and I love that hook where Heather Langenkamp goes to visit Wes Craven and the script is happening on screen as it is playing in real life in the film. Very ahead of its time. It doesn't get the love that it surely deserves. If you guys haven't seen it, I highly recommend checking it out. Everyone looks like they had a ball making this because they're playing versions of themselves, but not, if that makes sense. You know, Wes Craven said he was going to be in a van originally, typing the script as he went along with his eyelids cut off, but then he opted to put himself in a big mansion in the Hollywood Hills, as you do. Okay, coming in at number 4, get your keyboards ready, is Freddys Dead: The Final Nightmare. Wait, just hear me out. I am well aware that Freddys Dead: The Final Nightmare is a fucking shit show. It is a complete turnaround from what we got in the original 1984 Nightmare on Elm Street. It is so batshit crazy, borders on Looney Tunes, Wile E. Coyote, and Roadrunner, the heavy influences of Twin Peaks and being a product of its time of the early 90s. This film is so bad, it's great. Much in the vein of The Room. The Room is so bad it's good. I am the exact same with Freddys Dead: The Final Nightmare. Again, this list is so subjective and I've got it very high on my list, but also keep in mind Freddys Dead: The Final Nightmare is the first Elm Street film I ever watched, and that's why it's very sentimental to me. And upon rewatching it over the years, I do feel it's so bad it's good. I know people have a strong hate for this film. I totally get it, 100%. It is very wacky, it is very silly, it is very cringy, but I fucking love it. I still remember when I first watched it, it was on TV one night. My dad said he would tape it, but he said, no, I'm only gonna tape half of it because it might be too scary for you, mate. So anyway, I got up the next morning and I put the tape on and I'm watching the scene where Sean Greenblatt's character John Doe is in the plane, and just this weird, intrusive thought came into my head that Freddy's arm's gonna come through the plane window and rip his face off. But then he just ends up getting sucked out and then he wakes up in his bed. The film still scared me. Keep in mind, I was like 8 or 9 years old when I first saw the film. I really am guessing at this point. I think I was about between 8 or 10 years old, and it scared the shit out of me. And right after Freddys Dead: The Final Nightmare was Wes Craven's New Nightmare on telly, and Dad's like, nah, we're only gonna tape half of Freddys Dead for you, mate. It might be a bit too scary for you. But just the silliness of it, the camp, over-the-top performance of Robert Englund.
Looks like a frying pan and some eggs to me. You forgot the power glove.
The heavy Twin Peak influence of this film, being a product of the early 90s. I love this cast, man. You've got Leslie Dean, Breckin Meyer, Ricky Dean Logan. I had the honor of meeting Ricky Dean Logan a few years ago at Monsterpalooza, and he's such a cool guy. We just shot the shit, chat about it, a lot of stuff. You got Sean Greenblatt as John Doe. Fun fact, Sean Greenblatt's daughter, Ariana Greenblatt, played young Gamora in the Avengers films, and she's gone on to be a massive star. So I'm pretty sure Sean manages her. He's got a beautiful family, man, and they're so supportive of Ariana. Really cool to see. But I remember watching Sean Greenblatt and thinking, this guy's pretty good. Like, a man with no memory, wondering what the hell's going on. The town of Springwood is completely emptied out of all the children. They've been killed off, which is weird storytelling at its finest. You've got the power glove. You've got Freddy saying, great graphics. It's just a clusterfuck of beautiful shit. put it that way. So I hope you guys can understand where I'm coming from. I know it's last on a lot of people's list, don't get me wrong. I just think it's so bad and such a mess, it's fucking great. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Coming in at number 3 is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddys Revenge. Now, this film has garnered quite a lot of controversy. When I first saw the film, I think I was about 12 years old, I had no idea what the hell was going on in terms of the subtext and the themes of homosexuality and, you know, being in the closet, coming out of the closet. David Chaskin, the writer, wrote it as subtext. He was quoted as saying, you know, this is an era of post-AIDS, and a lot of people weren't sure about coming out of the closet and coming out to their families, loved ones and stuff like that, because it still was quite taboo. To me, that whole theme and subtext never bothered me in the slightest. I think this is a fucking great film and severely underrated in the Elm Street series. Robert Englund gives one of his most evil performances. The aesthetic of Freddy is so scary in this film, with Kevin Yeager's brilliant prosthetic makeup, making him look a lot more like a male witch with the hook nose and whatnot. Mark Patton delivers a wonderful performance, and you really feel for the guy. And I know he's had some problems post Nightmare on Elm Street 2. He left acting after that. Mind you, he has done certain things here and there, but my heart really does go out to the guy. He felt that this would ruin his career because he was still closeted at the time of filming. You've got a young Kim Myers in here who gives a wonderful performance as Lisa, who looks a lot like Meryl Streep. It's ridiculous. I love the character of Ron Grady. He's brilliant, and that kind of odd dynamic between Jesse and Ron always had people questioning their relationship. Are they more than just friends? Again, I was so young, I had no idea what the hell was going on. I was just there for the scares, the gore, and I definitely got it. Some of the kills in this are brilliant. Granted, it is weird seeing Freddy out in the real world at a pool party where, you know, big buff teenagers could have easily taken him down. And I understand why Wes Craven just rolled his eyes at this film. It's essentially like that meme of The Godfather. They massacred my boy. Regardless, I love the cast of this film. I love the acting. I love the special effects. There's something so unique about this Elm Street film. It does try to be part of the timeline, but at the same time, it stands on its own, and I love it for that. Coming in at number 2, and this was very hard because I was always going back and forth. We have Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. This is nearly Freddy's peak of popularity before The Dream Master. This is the MTV version of Freddy Krueger. So we got Chuck Russell helming the director's chair, and he wanted to make Freddy a lot more cooler, a lot more smart-ass, more savvy. The young actors in this film are the best out of the entire series for me. You've got these kids in a mental asylum that are essentially the last of the Elm Street children. They're being haunted by Freddy. He's trying to finish them all off and wipe out all of the Elm Street children once and for all. The kills and dreams in this film are some of the best. You've got Philip, the young man who carves the puppets that ends up getting his veins split out like a marionette puppet, and Freddy's making him walk through the halls like a puppet. I remember seeing that for the first time and I was cringing. The makeup effects are beautiful. It's a wonderful concept. That Freddy puppet with the morphing head scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. And the young cast works so well together. They have great chemistry. They team up at the end. They work really well together. You believe the fact that these guys are trying to take down Freddy, and they all care about each other. We have Heather Langenkamp and John Saxon returning for the respectable roles of Nancy and Lieutenant Thompson, even though he's been demoted to a security guard. I love that they keep that continuity, that Lieutenant Thompson hasn't coped well with the events that happened in part 1. He's now an alcoholic in a bar, and yet Nancy is now a psychologist trying to do her best to save children, much like how she was in the original film. And it is so pop culture-esque in this film. You've got Dick Cavett making a cameo, and then you've got him morph into Freddy and kill Jar Jar Gabor. It's just a laugh riot, but at the same time as being a laugh riot, it has its serious moments, it has its beautiful 80s horror elements. Robert is just great as Freddy. By that point, he's fully understood this character, and he's like, let's just go full ham at the direction of Chuck Russell. Coming in at number 1, of course, is the original 1984 Nightmare on Elm Street, directed by Wes Craven. As most of you guys know, my first Elm Street film was Freddys Dead: The Final Nightmare, and the last film that I ever watched was the original 1984 Elm Street. I think that is the best way to start it off, because you start off with something so batshit silly and end up with something so dark, brutal, and psychologically damaging in true Wes Craven form. Freddy is at his most evil, up there with the part 2 iteration of Freddy, but I love the fact that he's hidden in shadows, he barely says a word, he's lit perfectly, he's just so mean and teasing and taking delight in that tease. It's essentially the foreplay he has before he's killed. Tina's death is by far the best death in the entire series, and what a way to start with Freddy's kills, man. Being dragged up the wall. We've got a young Johnny Depp in his first feature film. I think he was 20 or 21 at the time, and his death was brilliant, being pulled into the bed. I love the idea of, with Rod's death, that you think he's hung himself in his jail cell. In fact, it was Freddy. The special effects for that were great. Very old school stuff. Like I said, Freddy coming through the wall was just some spandex. Again, it was a very last minute thing. This film should not have been made, let alone released. They ran out of money. There are times on set where Wes Craven was going to walk off the project, Robert Shea was just going to cut the whole thing altogether. And it's a great little success story. If you guys haven't seen the documentary Never Sleep Again, The Elm Street Legacy, check it out. Not just for the rest of the documentary, but also the segment on the first Elm Street, as well as the book with the same name, Never Sleep Again. It's just all about the making of the first Elm Street, and again, it shouldn't have been released, man. It's a miracle it did come out and it all came together, because we were introduced to one of the greatest horror villains in horror history. And for that, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1 is my #1 Ghouls and Ghoulettes. So again, I know this is a very wacky, subjective list, especially where I ranked Freddys Dead: The Final Nightmare. I hope you understood where I was coming from. Again, like The Room, so bad it's good. So guys, with that being said, drop a comment below. Let me know what is your worst Elm Street right up to your favorite Elm Street. Happy fucking Halloween, Ghouls and Ghoulettes. I've got a lot more horror themed content coming your way, because I've had an absolute ball this month, and I can't thank you guys enough for your wonderful support. You guys have just been absolutely beautiful. Guys, wherever you are in the world, have yourselves an absolute cracker of a day. If you are going out or trick-or-treating for Halloween this weekend, please take care of yourselves and have an amazing time. Hope you're well, hope you're happy, be merry, be silly, and until next time, Ghouls and Ghoulettes, please always remember, cosplayers do it best.